Cemetery Entrance by Rick Powell. Who can tell the strength of love? Can one measure all of its might? It can make the frail walk. It can give the blinded sight. We were the best of friends growing up. Two of a kind, no one can tear us apart. But as we grew older, our foolishness started to dim. He met the love of his life. Here, my story will start. She was one of a kind, a beauty with no equal. With hair of the brightest gold, from her eyes the sun had shone. Her heart was never vain, her soul was always generous. With her always in his life, he knew he'd never feel alone. He met her at a cafe, one day in the spring. His mind was on other things when he nudged her on the arm. Coffee spilled everywhere. He apologized sincerely. She looked into his eyes and knew he meant no harm. One look was all it took, and it was love at first sight. From that day on, they would always be together. They were two souls sharing just one heart. Their love strong and firm. No one can ever sever. Her and his life never tarnished our friendship. Her love made him complete. I've never seen him so strong. He seemed like he could handle whatever life could give him. I knew that they would be wed. It wouldn't be very long. The tragedy struck one rainy, windy night. She was struck by a car when she was crossing a lane. He called from the hospital, tears in his voice. But the words I didn't hear. All I heard was his pain. I rushed to his side. His soul looked so broken. He held on to her hand the whole night through. I went into the hall as he whispered to her, sat in that lonely corridor, at a loss of what to do. He visited her every day, though her mind was an abyss. He would whisper to her darkness, silently asleep. He barely left her side in the long weeks ahead. On his dark nights alone, he'd constantly weep. He called late one night, his voice with no emotion. He said she'd awoken from her abyss, whispered words of love, kissed him, joy unmeasured, of promises to keep. Then she closed her eyes again. Angels took her soul above. A part of him died that night, when last she had left him. He never spoke of her final words before her spirit did climb. He only whispered that she'd see him once again. They would walk side by side in 1 year's time. The funeral was somber. The mourners were many. I stayed by his side as he quietly did grieve. Though she was buried deep in the cold, cold earth, by his heart I knew she never did leave. In the weeks ahead he would visit her grave, standing near her stone, speaking to the ground. A few of the times I went with my broken friend. Though I was by his side, he acted like no one was around. He'd talk of promises kept and the strength of love, how their souls are one, how they will never be apart, how they would be together again sometime soon. Death is not the final end. It's just another start. It was 1 year to the day when I last saw him. An October storm was brewing with lightning overhead. He called and said the time had come to reunite with his love. When I asked what he meant, the line then went dead. I got in my car and into that storm I started to drive. I knew all along where his destination would be. Into the night, to the cemetery I drove. I was not at all prepared for what my eyes would then see. The rain was blowing hard when I pulled near the entrance. My headlights illuminated 2 shapes as I passed. I stopped my car and was going to roll down my window. I meant to call out, and all I could manage was a gasp. One wet figure had her back facing to me. A figure clothed in white, with the most golden of hair. Embracing her form was my good friend facing towards me. Head tilted to the sky, in my direction, he did not peer. His face had a look of one so contented, like a traveler coming home from some long-lost mile. Though his closed eyes were being filled with either rain or tears, on his upturned face was the most heavenly of a smile. I drove away for reasons I could not mention. There are answers to questions not for any of us to seek. As I drove quickly away, I looked into my rearview mirror. I swore I saw her pale hand reach up and caress his wet cheek. I never did hear of my friend again after that evening, though I miss him so with all of my might. But I know he is with his love, out there, somewhere, spending eternity together in their own endless night.